You are already 30 and still single. Must be tough spending Christmases alone. My sister Chloe sneered loud enough for the entire dining room to hear. The clinking of crystal glasses abruptly stopped. Laughter erupted around the large mahogany table from my aunts and uncles. My mother Beatrice simply smiled and told me she is just joking, Maya. You really need to learn how to take a joke, too. I slowly set my wine glass down on the table, wiped my mouth with a linen napkin, and looked right into my sister's eyes. Do not worry about me, I said calmly. I have been married for a long time. My mother froze mid-toast, her jaw practically hitting the floor. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family who constantly underestimated your worth. Trust me, you will want to hear how I absolutely destroyed their perfect holiday. My name is Maya, and I am 30 years old. To understand the sheer panic on my mother's face, you have to understand the intense dynamic in our Chicago penthouse. Well, it was my mother's penthouse paid for by years of desperately keeping up appearances in our local community and pretending we were royalty. I grew up as the absolute black sheep of the family. While my younger sister Chloe was busy being the golden child who could do no wrong, I was the constant disappointment. The ultimate betrayal in my mother's eyes was when I refused to work for our family's boutique insurance firm after graduating college. I wanted to build my own path to create something from the ground up, instead of coasting on the family name and dealing with their constant micromanagement. My mother called me a failure. She called me a dreamer who would end up struggling on the streets. She completely cut me off financially when I was just 22, leaving me to figure out my own survival. I spent years working endless hours building my life from scratch while my family pretended I did not exist. I never asked them for a dime and they never offered one. Fast forward to this Christmas dinner. I only agreed to come because my mother insisted we needed a complete family photo for her elite church newsletter. The dining table was an obnoxious display of wealth with gold-plated chargers and imported floral centerpieces that cost more than my first car. The smell of roasted meats and heavy perfumes filled the air. Chloe sat across from me, dripping in designer labels that I knew for a fact she bought using my mother's credit cards. Chloe is 28 and calls herself a luxury event planner, but she spends way more time planning her social media aesthetic than organizing actual events. Sitting right next to her was her husband, Liam. Liam is a 32-year-old white man from what he loudly claims is an old money family. He wears custom suits and treats everyone in the service industry like absolute garbage. My mother completely worships him. To her, Liam is the pinnacle of success, the ultimate prize her golden child managed to secure. Every time Liam opens his mouth, my mother acts like he is dropping profound, life-changing wisdom. The entire evening had been a relentless barrage of passive-aggressive insults aimed directly at me. Chloe would ask about my little startup project, making sure to emphasize the word little every single time. I kept my composure, slicing into my prime rib while ignoring her jabs. I knew my silence was driving her crazy because Chloe thrives on getting a reaction. She wants you to argue so she can play the victim and have my mother run to her defense. Finally, she leaned across the table, swirling her expensive champagne. Seriously, Maya, she said, her voice dripping with fake pity. It is actually kind of sad. You are 30 years old, living in some tiny apartment, probably eating takeout every night. You should really let Liam set you up with one of his junior analysts. At least then you might have a chance at a normal life with someone who can provide for you. My mother chimed in, nodding vigorously from the head of the table. You really should listen to your sister Maya. She has built such a beautiful life. She and Liam are the perfect team. If you had just stayed with the family business instead of chasing silly dreams, you might have a husband like Liam too. Men want women with stability, not women playing entrepreneur and struggling to pay rent every month. Liam puffed out his chest, adjusting his silk tie. He gave me a condescending smile that made my blood boil. It is a tough world out there, Maya, he said smoothly. If you ever need a small loan to keep your little business afloat, just let me know. I am about to close a massive deal anyway. I can spare some change for family to help you get by. The condescension in that room was suffocating. They sat there judging me, pitying me, and assuming I was a struggling failure simply because I did not wear my bank account on my sleeve like they did. They had absolutely no idea that my little business was actually a massive venture capital firm that I had co-founded. They had no idea that I could buy and sell Liam 10 times over before breakfast. But I was not ready to reveal my financial status just yet. I wanted to hit them where it would hurt the most, which was their obsession with image status and traditional family milestones. My mother raised her crystal glass, tapping it with a silver spoon to get everyone's attention. To Chloe and Liam, she announced, her voice loud and proud, echoing through the dining room. The perfect couple, bringing so much success and pride to our family. And to Maya, that she might one day find some direction and stop spending these beautiful holidays completely alone. That was the exact moment I decided I had had enough of playing the quiet scapegoat. I picked up my linen napkin, wiped my hands, and let out a soft, genuine laugh. The sound cut through the room, making my mother stop with her glass halfway to her lips. "Do not worry about my holidays, Mom," I said, leaning back in my chair and locking eyes with Chloe. "And please keep your junior analysts away from me, Liam. I certainly do not need a setup from you." Chloe scoffed, crossing her arms over her chest. "Oh, please, Maya." She rolled her eyes. "You have been single since college. There is no shame in admitting you need help finding a man. You are not getting any younger, you know." I reached into my purse, slowly pulling out my phone and placing it face down on the table. "I am not single, Chloe," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously calm and steady register. "In fact, I have been happily married for a long time to a man who makes your husband look like a broke amateur." The silence in the dining room was absolute. You could hear a pin drop on the thick Persian rug. My mother froze mid-toast, her wine spilling slightly onto the pristine white tablecloth. Chloe's smug smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer confusion and panic. Liam's jaw clenched so hard, I thought his teeth might shatter. The hook was set, and the illusion of their perfect family was about to be shattered entirely. For a full 30 seconds, the only sound in that massive dining room was the hum of the central heating and the distant traffic of downtown Chicago. Then, my mother set her wine glass down so hard the crystal stem threatened to snap. She grabbed a white cloth napkin and fiercely dabbed at the spilled Merlot on the table. "Married." My mother let out a sharp, patronizing laugh that echoed against the high ceiling. "You really are losing your grip on reality, Maya. This is beyond pathetic even for you." I sat back in my velvet chair, crossing my legs. "I am completely serious, Mother. I have been married for 3 years." The murmurs erupted instantly. My aunts exchanged wide-eyed glances while my uncles shifted uncomfortably in their tailored suits. Liam unbuttoned his suit jacket, leaning forward with a deeply offended scowl. He clearly did not appreciate being compared to a broke amateur. My mother stood up, towering over her end of the table. Her face was flushed with absolute anger. "This is exactly the kind of delusional behavior that forced me to cut you off," she declared, her voice vibrating with disdain. "You live in a complete fantasy world. You always have. 8 years ago, I handed you a 6-figure regional director position at my insurance firm on a silver platter. I gave you the chance to carry on the family legacy, to actually make something of yourself and guarantee your financial security." She pointed a manicured finger directly at my face. "And what did you do? You spat in my face. You walked away from a real career to chase delusional startup projects in a rat-infested studio apartment. You threw away everything to play business owner, and now, because you cannot handle sitting across from your highly successful sister, you are inventing a wealthy husband to save face. It is embarrassing, Maya. You are embarrassing yourself in front of our entire family." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply picked up my water glass and took a slow, methodical sip. My absolute silence only infuriated them more. I could see the veins popping in my mother's neck. She hated when she could not get an emotional reaction out of me. Liam scoffed loudly, rubbing his chin with a mockingly thoughtful expression. "A man who makes me look like an amateur. That is rich, Maya. What does this invisible husband of yours do exactly? Does he manage the night shift at a local diner? Did he buy you a plastic ring from a vending machine?" I kept my eyes locked on him. No, Liam, I said smoothly. He manages asset portfolios that could swallow your entire bloodline without making a single dent in his bottom line. Chloe slammed her hands flat on the table, causing the expensive silverware to clatter against the china plates. Stop lying, Maya, she shrieked, losing her carefully crafted, elegant persona entirely. You are completely pathological. You are just trying to ruin my Christmas because you cannot stand that Liam and I actually have money and status. You cannot stand that I am the one living the life you failed to achieve. Chloe marched around the table, her designer heels clicking aggressively against the hardwood floor. She stopped right next to my chair and grabbed my left hand, holding it up aggressively for the entire room to see. Look, everyone, she yelled, pointing at my bare fingers. Do you see a ring? Do you see a massive diamond from this supposed billionaire? No, because she is making it all up. I pulled my hand back, gently smoothing the fabric of my dress. I do not need to wear a diamond to validate my marriage, Chloe. We prefer to keep our private lives private and our investments secure. Unlike some people who finance their entire jewelry collection with their mother's high-interest credit cards. Chloe turned bright red. My mother gasped loudly, clutching her pearl necklace, as if she had just been physically struck. The extended family members at the far end of the table began whispering furiously to one another. You know what? I bet you did marry someone, Chloe sneered, pacing back and forth behind my chair like a caged animal. You were always so desperate for any kind of attention. I bet you found some broke loser who needed a place to crash. If this guy actually exists, he is probably a gold digger who thought you still had access to Mom's trust fund. He probably thought he struck the jackpot until he realized you are completely broke and entirely cut off. She leaned down, pressing her hands on the armrests of my chair, her face just inches from mine. Her voice dripped with absolute venom as she delivered her final insult. Tell me the truth, Maya. Is your imaginary broke husband waiting outside in a rusted-out sedan right now, hoping my mother will take pity on you and send you home with some leftover prime rib? I gently pushed my chair back from the table. The wood scraped loudly against the floor. Before I could even formulate my response to Chloe, a heavy hand slammed down on the table. Liam rose from his seat. He buttoned his suit jacket with an agonizingly slow and deliberate motion, acting as though he were the reigning patriarch of the entire family. He walked around the table, placing a protective hand on Chloe's shoulder, and pulled her slightly behind him as if he were shielding her from a dangerous threat. He looked down at me with an expression of profound manufactured pity. Maya, let us be reasonable here, Liam began. His voice was thick with condescension, dripping with the kind of arrogant authority that only a mediocre man with an inflated ego could muster. We all know this is a difficult time of year for you. The holidays have a way of magnifying our failures. You come here to your mother's beautiful penthouse and you see Chloe. You see my beautiful wife radiating success. You see the life we have built together. A sprawling estate in the suburbs, multiple luxury cars, a marriage built on absolute trust and staggering financial security. He took a step closer, shaking his head with a theatrical sigh. It is natural to feel envious, Maya. It really is. You look at our perfect home, and then you look at your own life. It must be devastating to realize you threw away your family's support to end up with absolutely nothing. You see us taking expensive vacations, buying designer clothes, and expanding our investment portfolios. You see the respect your mother gives me. But fabricating a wealthy husband just to compete with me, that is a new low even for you. You do not need to invent a billionaire to sit at this table. My mother beamed at him. The absolute adoration in her eyes was sickening. She clasped her hands together, resting them against her heart. Liam, you are too good to her, my mother said, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. You show her so much grace when she offers you nothing but disrespect. You are exactly the kind of man this family needed, a true leader who knows how to handle a crisis with maturity. Liam nodded, acknowledging her praise like a king accepting tribute from his loyal subjects. He turned his attention back to me, crossing his arms over his chest. His French cuffs pulled back, revealing his watch. He made sure to angle his wrist so the heavy gold timepiece caught the light of the crystal chandelier above us. Listen to me, Maya. Liam continued, adopting a low, soothing tone as if speaking to a psychiatric patient. I know men. I know exactly how the world of high finance and real wealth operates. Billionaires do not hide their wives. They do not let their spouses show up to family holiday dinners alone while they wait in imaginary cars. You are hurting. You are desperate for a win. If you need help getting back on your feet, if you need a therapist to help you deal with these pathological lies, I will personally pay for your sessions. Consider it an early Christmas gift from my family to you. We just want you to get better and stop trying to tear down the perfect life Chloe and I have built. The entire room watched me waiting for my inevitable breakdown. My aunts and uncles held their breath. They expected me to scream, to cry, or to storm out of the penthouse in a fit of absolute humiliation. That was the old Maya. The Maya who cared about their approval. The Maya who would have let this white man walk into her family's home and speak to her like she was an unruly child. I stood up. I smoothed the front of my designer dress. It was a subtle custom piece that cost more than Liam's entire wardrobe for the year. I took my time, deliberately letting the silence stretch until the tension in the room became unbearable. I stepped right up to Liam. I did not blink. I did not look away. My eyes drifted slowly down from his smug face to his crossed arms, locking directly onto the thick gold watch strapped to his wrist. I know watches. When you are surrounded by real wealth, you learn how to spot the counterfeits immediately. I stared at the sweeping second hand on his dial. It stuttered. Real Rolex hands glide with absolute fluid precision. This one had a microscopic jerk. The magnification over the date window was slightly off-center. The gold plating had the faintest brassy undertone that screamed cheap manufacturing. The man claiming to be the wealthy savior of my family, the man bragging about his old money pedigree, was standing in front of me wearing a high-tier knockoff, trying to lecture me about high finance. I let out a soft, breathless chuckle that echoed in the dead silent room. I slowly raised my eyes from the fake watch back to his face. Liam's smug expression faltered. A tiny bead of sweat materialized along his hairline. He quickly uncrossed his arms, letting his sleeve drop down to cover his wrist, but it was too late. He knew that I knew. I leaned in, slightly lowering my voice so the underlying threat was unmistakable to him, but perfectly audible to the rest of the silent room. You are giving me advice on how to build a perfect life, I asked, my tone slicing through the air like a razor blade. You want to talk to me about trust and staggering financial security while wearing a pathetic replica watch that you probably bought out of the trunk of a car? Liam took a heavy step back, his face draining of all color. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The illusion of his impenetrable confidence shattered in a fraction of a second. I smiled, a cold, calculating smile that made my mother gasp out loud. You should really worry about your own perfect home, Liam, I said softly, ensuring every single word hit its mark with devastating precision. You should worry about it right now before it completely collapses. Liam's face flushed a deep, mottled red. The veins in his neck bulged against his starched white collar. For a split second, genuine panic flashed in his eyes, but his massive ego quickly overrode it. He let out a loud, forced laugh that sounded completely hollow. It was the laugh of a cornered man trying to project absolute dominance to cover up his own insecurities. He reached frantically into the breast pocket of his tailored jacket and pulled out his sleek smartphone. He unlocked the screen and held the device up high as if it were a shield that could deflect the truth I had just spoken. You are completely out of your mind, Maya, he spat, his voice echoing sharply in the tense dining room. You want to talk about things collapsing. You want to question my financial stability. I am literally hours away from finalizing a $10 million capital deployment. $10 million in pure liquid cash. The entire room gasped in unison. My aunts covered their mouths, while my uncles exchanged wide-eyed looks of profound respect. $10 million was a number that commanded immediate worship in my mother's house. Liam paced back and forth, tapping the screen of his phone aggressively. I am closing a deal with one of the most exclusive private venture capital funds in the country. This is not some local bank loan, Maya. This is an elite invite-only firm. They do not just open their doors to anyone with a checkbook. You have to be heavily vetted. You need a flawless financial pedigree and a verified 9-figure net worth just to get a preliminary meeting. And their managing partners are personally courting me. They are practically begging me to bring my capital to their principal investor circle. My mother practically shoved her own chair out of the way. She rushed around the table and grabbed Liam by the arm, looking up at him as if he had just descended from the heavens to bless her dining room. Her eyes were shining with tears of absolute adoration. Did you all hear that? She announced to the room, her voice trembling with overwhelming pride. $10 million. This is what true success looks like. This is what a real man, a real provider does. She patted his arm affectionately, clutching him like a prized trophy. Liam is taking this family to a level of prestige we have never even dreamed of. He is securing our legacy for generations to come. He is a visionary. He is the absolute savior of this family. She turned her head slowly, locking her eyes onto me. Her expression morphed from adoration for Liam to pure, unfiltered disgust. It is an absolute tragedy that some people in this room cannot just be happy for a successful man. It is a shame that pure jealousy makes people so bitter and so utterly delusional that they have to invent wealthy husbands and hurl baseless insults just to cope with their own massive failures. Chloe immediately moved to Liam's other side, clinging to him and resting her head on his shoulder. She shot me a triumphant glare. See, everyone? This is exactly why she is attacking us. She is just a bitter, broke spinster. She cannot handle the fact that my husband is a literal titan of industry while she has absolutely nothing to her name. Liam soaked up their praise like a sponge, his chest puffed out under his expensive suit jacket. The fear that had gripped him just moments ago was entirely gone, replaced by a toxic, arrogant sneer. He slid his phone back into his pocket and looked down at me, treating me like an insect he was preparing to crush under his expensive leather shoe. He stepped closer to my chair, leaning over slightly so his shadow fell across my plate. You see, Maya? That is the fundamental difference between you and me, he said, his voice dripping with absolute venom. You spend your days playing CEO in some cramped shared workspace. You beg local angel investors for a few $1,000s just to keep the lights on in whatever pathetic business you are running this week. You hustle for absolute scraps. He let out another condescending chuckle, shaking his head slowly. The private equity funds I am dealing with operate on a level you cannot even begin to comprehend. They control billions of dollars in global assets. They shape entire industries with a single signature. Your pathetic little startup would not even qualify to carry the briefcases for the junior analysts at this firm. You are entirely out of your depth, Maya. The companies I partner with would never even let someone like you walk through their front doors. My mother slammed her palm flat against the mahogany table. The sharp crack made the silverware jump. You will apologize to him right this second, Maya, she demanded, her voice trembling with absolute fury. You will stand up, look your brother-in-law in the eye, and beg for his forgiveness for your disgusting behavior. I did not move a single muscle. I simply tilted my head, observing the frantic energy vibrating from the head of the table. You are an absolute disgrace to this family, my mother continued, pointing a trembling finger in my direction. We gave you everything. We paid for your private school tuition. We sponsored your debutante cotillion. We groomed you to be part of the elite class of this city. And you threw it all into the gutter because you wanted to be rebellious. You look at Liam and you see everything you failed to secure for yourself. She walked over and placed her hands firmly on Liam's shoulders, treating him like a fragile monument that needed defending. Liam comes from true legacy, Maya. He comes from old money. His family has been summering in Martha's Vineyard since before you were even born. His grandfather sat on the board of regional banks. His bloodline is built on generational wealth and staggering financial intelligence. He knows how money works. He knows the people who control the markets. When a man of his caliber offers you a shred of advice, you do not insult his watch. You take notes and you say thank you. Chloe nodded vigorously, wiping a fake tear from her cheek. She is just a bitter spinster mom. She has nothing. No husband, no real career, no future. She is sitting here making up ridiculous lies about being married to a billionaire because her actual reality is entirely pathetic. My mother glared at me, her eyes burning with pure contempt. "You have spent your entire adult life humiliating me," she sneered. "You refuse to work at our firm. You refuse to marry within our social circle. You show up to my Christmas dinner trying to ruin the only successful marriage this family has produced. You are a miserable, jealous child. Now you will apologize to Liam right now, or I swear to God I will have the building security drag you out of my penthouse." Liam stood tall, basking in the absolute devotion of his wife and mother-in-law. He adjusted his suit lapels and gave me a magnanimous, painfully patronizing smile. "I am a forgiving man, Maya," he said, his tone dripping with fake grace. "I know you are intimidated by my success. I know my presence makes you feel inadequate. If you can swallow your pride and offer a sincere apology, I am willing to pretend this little outburst never happened. I might even still introduce you to some of my junior analysts." The room waited. My aunts and uncles held their breath, fully expecting me to cave. They had watched my mother break my spirit 1,000 times when I was younger. They expected the familiar script, where the rebellious daughter finally submits to the matriarch's demands to keep the peace. I picked up my linen napkin and dabbed the corner of my mouth. I placed it neatly beside my plate. Then I looked directly at my mother. "I am not apologizing to anyone," I said, my voice completely steady and devoid of any emotion. "I am certainly not apologizing to a man whose entire personality is built on a fabricated old money pedigree and a cheap suit." My mother gasped, clutching her chest. "How dare you?" I shifted my gaze to Liam, cutting off whatever arrogant response he was preparing. "You talk an incredibly big game about high finance, Liam. You stand in my mother's dining room screaming about your $10 million capital deployment like it makes you the king of Chicago. You brag about these elite private equity funds and their rigorous vetting processes. You claim they are begging for your money." I stood up slowly, resting my fingertips on the edge of the mahogany table. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "If this venture capital firm is so incredibly exclusive, Liam," I challenged, locking my eyes onto his sweating face, "if they control billions of dollars and shape entire global industries, if the managing partners are personally courting you for your brilliant financial mind." I took one slow, deliberate step toward him. "Then why do not you tell the whole table who they are?" I asked, my voice slicing through the silence like a scalpel. "Say the name of the fund, Liam. Read the name of the firm you are practically begging to take your money out loud for everyone to hear." Liam laughed, a harsh, booming sound that reverberated off the crystal glasses. "You want the name," he sneered. "Fine, I will give you the name Maya. Maybe you can write it down on a napkin and use it as motivation for your little startup." He smoothed his silk tie and puffed out his chest, standing taller. "The firm is Vanguard Apex." He paused, letting the syllables hang in the air as if he had just cast a magic spell over the dining room. My mother gasped, her hands flying to her cheeks. Even my uncles murmured in hushed, respectful tones. Vanguard Apex was a titan in the financial sector. It was an entity known for completely ruthless acquisitions and staggering returns. "That is right," Liam continued, soaking up the family's absolute awe. "Vanguard Apex. I am dealing directly with their senior acquisition team. My broker just informed me that our capital deployment file is sitting on the big boss's desk right now, waiting for final signature. The principal founder is notoriously selective. He is a ghost in the industry. Nobody gets a direct line to him. But my portfolio was so impeccable that they fast-tracked my clearance. I did not blink. I did not move a single muscle in my face." Inside my mind, a profound sense of amusement was slowly wrapping around the sheer audacity of this man. Vanguard Apex. He was trying to use Vanguard Apex to intimidate me. $10 million, I repeated, letting the number roll off my tongue. "And you are placing it directly into Vanguard Apex. Tell me, Liam, which specific investment vehicle are you utilizing for this deployment? Are you entering through their Tier 1 equity pool, or are you settling for a mezzanine debt structure?" The smug smile on Liam's face fractured. He blinked twice rapidly. His eyes darted to Chloe, then back to me. "It is a highly specialized capital injection," he stammered, recovering his arrogant tone a second too late. You would not understand the complexities of the tiered structure, Maya. It is strictly for accredited high net worth individuals. A specialized capital injection, I said, nodding slowly as if I were taking him seriously. Fascinating. Because usually when an accredited investor deploys 8 figures into a top-tier fund, they know their hurdle rate. What is the hurdle rate they promised you, Liam? What is the standard lockup period for this specific specialized injection? Is it 36 months, or did they lock you in for a full 60? My mother slammed her hand on the table again. Stop interrogating him, Maya. You are just throwing around vocabulary words you Googled to sound smart. I am just asking basic questions. Mother, I replied, never breaking eye contact with my sweating brother-in-law. Anyone dropping $10 million in liquid cash would know the lockup period. So, Liam, what is it? Liam tugged at his collar. The dining room was suddenly feeling very warm to him. The lockup period is standard. He deflected his voice, rising in volume to compensate for his absolute lack of knowledge. It is a standard industry timeframe. My broker handles the granular legalities. I focus on the macro-level strategy. That is how real executives operate. Real executives read their term sheets. I shot back, my voice sharp and commanding. And real executives would know that Vanguard Apex does not do standard capital injections for retail investors, bringing a paltry $10 million to the table. Paltry, Chloe shrieked, practically leaping out of her chair. $10 million is more money than you will ever see in your entire miserable life, Maya. I ignored her completely, keeping my gaze pinned to Liam. The man was drowning in his own fabricated narrative, and I was going to hand him an anchor. You see, Liam, I said, taking a slow, deliberate step toward him. Your story has a massive structural flaw. You claim your broker fast-tracked your paperwork directly to the big boss's desk for final signature. But Vanguard Apex completely restructured their onboarding pipeline last quarter. They implemented a mandatory blind review process. All preliminary capital from external brokers is routed directly through a specific subsidiary holding company registered in Delaware. It sits in escrow for a minimum of 14 days, undergoing aggressive compliance checks before it ever reaches the principal review desk in Chicago. I tilted my head, studying his pale face. There is absolutely no fast track for external capital, and the big boss never looks at a file until the compliance team clears the Delaware escrow. So if your broker is telling you that your file is sitting on the principal founder's desk right now, your broker is either lying to you or you are lying to this entire room. The silence that followed was absolute. The air in the penthouse felt thick enough to cut with a knife. Liam stood completely frozen. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost trapped in a tailored suit. His mouth opened, but he could not form a single word. He stared at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. How do you know that? Liam whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the central heating. He swallowed hard, his eyes wide with genuine panic. That Delaware restructuring was an internal memo. It was never released to the public. How do you know that? I did not answer his question. I simply let a cold, knowing smile touch my lips. Let him sweat. Let his mind spin wildly, trying to figure out how the estranged outcast of the family knew the intimate operational secrets of a multi-billion-dollar venture capital firm. Chloe could not stand it. She could not bear the sight of her perfect husband standing there looking so utterly defeated and terrified. She shoved her heavy dining chair back with a loud screech and stomped over, placing herself physically between Liam and me. She threw her arms out as if she were shielding him from a physical attack. "Shut your mouth, Maya," she shrieked, her voice pitching upward into a hysterical register. "Just shut your mouth right now. You are completely deranged." I raised a single eyebrow, taking a slow step back to create space. "I am just talking about high finance, Chloe. I thought that was the topic of the evening." "You are stalking him," she yelled, pointing an acrylic fingernail at my face. "You are so obsessed with our success that you are probably spending your pathetic lonely nights reading financial forums and hacking into corporate websites just to memorize big words. You came here tonight with a deliberate plan to ruin my Christmas because you are a toxic, bitter spinster who cannot stand to see anyone else happy." My mother stepped forward, immediately siding with her golden child. Chloe is absolutely right. You are acting like a lunatic, Maya. You string together a few business terms and think you can humiliate a man who operates in the upper echelons of society. It is sad. It is genuinely sad to watch you spiral like this. Liam seemed to recover a tiny fraction of his composure now that the two women were aggressively defending his honor. He pulled at his collar, taking a deep, shaky breath, and tried to stand tall again, though the terror in his eyes had not entirely vanished. You think you can come into this penthouse and tear us down because you are miserable, Chloe continued, pacing back and forth in front of me. You cannot break us, Maya. We are untouchable. Liam is securing a $10 million capital deployment, and look at me. Look at what I am doing. I am literally taking over the luxury event industry in this city. She flipped her hair over her shoulder, puffing out her chest with absolute arrogance. I just wrapped up the Winter Solstice Gala at the Drake Hotel. It was an invite-only black tie event for the wealthiest families in Chicago. I commanded a budget that would make your head spin. I had a team of 50 people working directly under my supervision. I flew in thousands of rare white orchids from Holland. The mayor was there, Maya. The actual mayor of Chicago shook my hand and told me it was the social event of the season. My mother clapped her hands together, her eyes shining with pride. That is right. Your sister is a premier luxury event planner. She operates in exclusive circles that you are not even allowed to clean the floors of. She is building an empire of absolute elegance and grace. Her clients trust her with millions of dollars to curate perfection. And what do you do, Maya? You play startup in a dirty rented office. I kept my expression perfectly neutral. Inside, I was savoring the sheer irony of their words. I knew the truth about the Winter Solstice Gala. I knew exactly how that event was funded, and I knew that Chloe's so-called empire was bleeding money faster than a severed artery. But I held my tongue. The night was still young, and I wanted them to dig their graves just a little bit deeper. You are nothing, Chloe spat, stepping so close to me that I could smell the heavy, expensive perfume radiating off her skin. You have no husband, you have no real career, you have no status. Liam is the best thing to ever happen to this family, and my business is flourishing. We are the definition of success. You are just a sad, lonely woman trying to drag us down to your miserable level. Before I could deliver my response, a sharp melodic chime echoed through the penthouse. The sound of the private elevator bell arriving at our floor instantly shattered the heavy tension in the dining room. My mother gasped, her hands flying to her cheeks in a flurry of absolute excitement. Her entire demeanor shifted from vicious anger to overwhelming joy in a fraction of a second. She smoothed down the front of her expensive silk dress and quickly patted her hair into place. "Oh my goodness!" she exclaimed, her eyes wide with anticipation. She turned to her son-in-law with a massive, beaming smile. "Liam, did you tell them to stop by?" Liam looked dazed, still sweating from our previous exchange. He blinked rapidly, clearly, having no idea what she was talking about. "Tell who to stop by?" "Your business associates," my mother said, waving her hand dismissively as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "The executives from Vanguard Apex. You said they were personally courting you. They must have come to drop off holiday gifts or celebrate the closing of the deployment. Who else would have clearance to come up the private elevator on Christmas Eve?" My mother clapped her hands together, organizing the room like a general preparing for a parade. "Everyone compose yourselves," she commanded. "Chloe, fix your posture. Liam, button your jacket. We have billionaires stepping into our home." She turned her head and shot me a look of pure lethal warning. "Maya, you will stand in the corner and you will keep your mouth completely shut. If you say a single word and embarrass this family in front of real wealth, I will personally see to it that you are destroyed. Do you understand me?" I stood perfectly still. I did not argue. I simply offered her a calm, compliant smile. My mother practically floated toward the grand mahogany double doors of the foyer, her face stretched into a practiced, welcoming grin. She was preparing to bow down to the elite associates of Vanguard Apex. She was preparing to welcome a titan of industry, and I just watched her go, knowing exactly who was waiting on the other side of those doors. My mother reached out and grasped the heavy brass handles of the double doors, pulling them inward with a sweeping theatrical flourish. "Welcome to our home," she began, her voice coated in a thick layer of honey and practiced charm. She had prepared a greeting meant for corporate royalty, a sycophantic smile plastered across her face, completely ready to bow down to whoever Vanguard Apex had sent to her doorstep. But the words died instantly in her throat. The man standing in the threshold was not some mid-level executive or a junior associate delivering a holiday gift basket. It was Sterling. He stepped into the foyer with the kind of effortless, staggering command that simply cannot be taught or faked. The pacing of his entrance was deliberate and agonizingly steady. If a camera were capturing this exact moment, it would have tracked his every movement in a slow, relentless glide, perfectly matching the heavy, solid thud of his shoes against the imported Italian marble floor. He did not rush. He did not look around with polite curiosity. He moved with the quiet, lethal grace of an apex predator stepping into a room full of completely oblivious prey. The air in the penthouse seemed to instantly shift, changing pressure the second he crossed the threshold. The sheer aura of a self-made billionaire radiated from him, filling the space and suffocating the fake elite atmosphere my mother had spent decades trying to cultivate. He wore no flashy logos. He carried no ostentatious accessories meant to scream about his net worth. There was no fake gold watch on his wrist. Sterling was dressed in a dark charcoal cashmere turtleneck, tailored perfectly to his broad athletic shoulders, paired with bespoke midnight blue trousers. The entire outfit whispered of a quiet, untouchable stealth wealth. It was a level of absolute minimalism that ironically cost more than my mother's entire luxury vehicle collection sitting down in the garage. His presence alone made the opulent crystal chandeliers and the gold-plated chargers on the dining table look incredibly cheap and incredibly desperate. My mother took an involuntary step back. She did not know his name, but her finely tuned social climber instincts immediately recognized that she was standing in the presence of someone wielding immense, terrifying power. Her practiced greeting evaporated. She stood there clutching the door handle, her eyes wide, and searching, completely intimidated by a man who had not even spoken a single word yet. From the dining room, Chloe peeked out from behind the archway. Her eyes widened as they swept over Sterling. Instantly, her posture shifted. She reached a hand up to smooth her hair and adjust the neckline of her dress, totally captivated by the sheer magnetism of the man standing in our foyer. She was completely unaware of the absolute destruction he was about to bring down upon her perfect life. But it was Liam's reaction that was the absolute crowning jewel of the evening. When Sterling's steady, heavy footsteps echoed from the foyer into the dining room, Liam leaned around my mother to see who had arrived. I watched his face closely, not wanting to miss a single microsecond of this glorious realization. I wanted to burn the image of his collapsing ego into my memory forever. The exact moment Liam's eyes locked onto Sterling's face, the blood completely vanished from his cheeks. His fake tan seemed to wash away, leaving him looking like a sick, terrified ghost. His knees actually buckled slightly, causing him to grip the edge of the mahogany dining table just to keep his legs from giving out completely. His mouth dropped open, but his vocal cords refused to cooperate. The arrogant, boastful man who had just spent the last hour berating me, lecturing me about the upper echelons of high finance and bragging about his untouchable connections, was suddenly trembling. I could actually see his hands shaking against the dark wood of the table. In his mind, he was probably trying to calculate why the principal founder and untouchable ghost of Vanguard Apex was standing in his mother-in-law's suburban Chicago penthouse on Christmas Eve. His massive ego was likely telling him that his $10 million capital deployment was so incredibly important that the billionaire CEO had come to personally secure the deal. But the sheer terror in his eyes told a different story. He knew he was out of his depth. He knew he was standing in the presence of a financial titan who could end his career with a single phone call. My mother, noticing Liam's profound physical reaction, turned to him with a confused but hopeful expression. "Liam," she whispered loudly, breaking the heavy silence. "Is this the associate you were expecting? Is this the gentleman from the firm?" Liam did not answer her. He could not even look at her. His gaze was entirely paralyzed, locked onto Sterling as the tall, imposing man stepped fully into the dining room light. Liam scrambled to stand up straight. He pushed his chair back so violently it nearly toppled over onto the Persian rug. He stood at absolute rigid attention, acting like a disgraced soldier facing a five-star general. He desperately tried to button his suit jacket, but his fingers were shaking so badly he fumbled with the fabric. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He forced himself to speak, his voice cracking in a high-pitched stutter that stripped away every last ounce of his manufactured dignity. Mr. Sterling." Liam forced his trembling legs to move. He took a stumbling step forward, stepping out from behind his chair and frantically wiping his sweaty right palm against the side of his trousers before extending it. His face contorted into a mask of pure, desperate sycophancy. The arrogant sneer he had worn all evening was completely eradicated, replaced by the eager, pathetic grin of a man hoping to be thrown a bone. "Sir, what an absolute and profound honor," Liam gushed, his voice shaking so badly he could barely string the words together. "I cannot believe you came here personally. My broker said Vanguard Apex was meticulous, but this level of hands-on engagement is truly staggering. Please come in. Welcome to our home. I was just telling the family about the upcoming capital deployment. We are so incredibly thrilled to partner with your firm." He stood there, his hand thrust out into the empty space between them, his entire body leaning forward in a desperate bid for validation. He looked like a starving dog begging for a scrap from the master's table. My mother, sensing the monumental shift in the room's power dynamic, immediately snapped out of her initial paralysis. The sheer mention of Vanguard Apex and the realization that the principal founder was standing in her dining room sent her social climbing instincts into absolute overdrive. She frantically smoothed down the front of her silk dress, flattening invisible wrinkles, and adjusted the heavy pearl necklace at her throat. She stepped forward, positioning herself right beside Liam, her face stretched into the most dazzling, subservient smile I had ever seen her wear. "Oh, Mr. Sterling, what a magnificent surprise!" my mother cooed, her tone dripping with manufactured elegance. "Liam has told us so much about your brilliant firm. We are simply overjoyed to welcome a man of your extraordinary caliber into our home. Please let me take your coat. May I offer you a glass of our finest vintage scotch or perhaps some champagne? We were just celebrating Liam's massive success, and your arrival is the absolute crown jewel of our Christmas Eve." Chloe was not about to be left out of the spotlight. She instantly dropped the vicious defensive posture she had held against me just moments prior. She tossed her hair over her shoulder and quickly adjusted the neckline of her designer dress, pulling it down just a fraction of an inch. She practically shoved my mother aside to get closer to the front of the welcoming committee. She flashed a brilliant practice smile, completely ignoring the fact that she had been screaming at the top of her lungs a mere 2 minutes ago. "It is such a pleasure to finally meet you," Chloe chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I am Chloe, Liam's wife. I handle luxury events for the elite circles of Chicago, so I completely understand the demands of operating at your level. Liam has been working so incredibly hard on this portfolio for you. We are just so honored that you took the time to come see him tonight." They stood there in a tight little cluster. My mother, my sister, and my brother-in-law. The holy trinity of fake wealth and staggering entitlement. They were practically vibrating with anticipation, completely united in their desperate attempt to secure the attention and approval of the billionaire standing before them. They had completely forgotten about me. I was once again the invisible disappointment banished to the background, while they focused all their energy on worshiping the man they believed was there to elevate their status to unimaginable heights. I stood perfectly still near the edge of the mahogany table, watching this pathetic circus unfold. I did not say a word. I did not need to. Sterling had not said a single word since crossing the threshold. He did not return my mother's sycophantic greeting. He did not acknowledge Chloe's batting eyelashes or her luxury event planner pitch. His face remained a mask of absolute unreadable calm. His dark eyes swept over the extravagant dining room, taking in the gold-plated chargers, the crystal glasses, and the desperate family standing in his way with a look of mild clinical detachment. Then his gaze shifted, It moved past Liam, past Chloe, past my mother, and locked directly onto me. The corners of his eyes softened just a fraction, a subtle shift that only I would ever be able to recognize. He began to walk. Liam stood at absolute attention, his hand still extended awkwardly in the air, waiting for the firm handshake that would seal his $10 million fantasy and validate his existence in front of my family. He leaned in closer, holding his breath. A wide, eager smile plastered across his sweating face. Sterling closed the distance between them. His heavy, measured footsteps echoed against the marble floor. Liam braced himself, preparing his rehearsed elevator pitch, preparing to thank the billionaire for his time. But Sterling did not stop. He did not slow down. He did not even turn his head. He walked right past Liam, brushing past his extended, trembling hand, as if the man were nothing more than a piece of cheap, invisible furniture. The draft of Sterling's movement literally rustled the fabric of Liam's knockoff suit jacket as he glided past him, leaving the arrogant brother-in-law standing there with his hands suspended in empty space. The sheer level of dismissal was absolutely devastating. It was not an insult. It was a complete and utter erasure of Liam's existence. Liam's eager smile froze permanently on his face. His extended hand remained hovering in the air, trembling violently as his brain completely failed to process what had just happened. The principal founder of Vanguard Apex, the man he had just claimed was personally courting his investments, had just walked through him like he was a ghost. My mother's jaw dropped, her perfectly rehearsed welcome speech dying instantly on her lips. She spun around, her eyes wide with total bewilderment, watching Sterling's broad shoulders move right past her chosen golden son-in-law. Chloe blinked rapidly, her flirtatious expression shattering into pieces of sheer confusion. They were completely paralyzed, unable to comprehend why the titan of industry was completely ignoring the man who had supposedly summoned him. Sterling did not spare a single glance backward. He kept his eyes locked on me, navigating the length of the long dining table with absolute, unwavering purpose. The entire room seemed to hold its collective breath as Sterling closed the final few feet between us. He did not spare a single glance at the opulent holiday decorations, the towering Christmas tree, or the dozen family members staring at him in absolute paralyzed silence. His focus was entirely and solely on me. When he reached my chair, the terrifying aura of the untouchable corporate titan simply vanished. It was replaced by a warmth and a gentle familiarity that made my heart flutter exactly the way it did on our very first date. He stepped into my personal space and placed his large, warm hands softly on my shoulders. He leaned down, taking his time, and pressed a long, tender kiss to my forehead. "I am so sorry I am late. My beautiful wife," he said. His deep, rich voice carried effortlessly through the dead-silent dining room. The holiday traffic coming off the Magnificent Mile was an absolute nightmare. He pulled back just enough to look into my eyes, brushing a stray lock of hair behind my ear with profound affection. "I hope I did not keep you waiting too long. Tell me, is everyone treating you well tonight?" The sheer casual intimacy of his words acted like a live grenade detonating in the center of my mother's perfect Christmas dinner. A sharp, piercing shatter broke the silence. My mother's fingers had simply gone slack. The heavy crystal wine glass she had been clutching slipped from her grasp and plummeted to the floor. It smashed into 100 glittering pieces against the imported hardwood. Deep red wine splashed across the white baseboards and pooled into the expensive Persian rug, expanding like a dark stain. But my mother did not even look down. She could not tear her eyes away from the sight of the billionaire titan of Chicago holding my face in his hands. Her jaw hung open, her chest heaving as she struggled to pull oxygen into her lungs. Liam reacted as if he had just been physically struck by a speeding freight train. He stumbled backward, his expensive leather shoes slipping on the polished floor. He collided violently with the edge of the mahogany dining table. The impact sent a violent shudder through the heavy wood, causing the gold-plated chargers and silver cutlery to rattle loudly. He gripped the edge of the table with white-knuckled fingers, fighting just to keep his trembling legs from giving out completely. "Wife," Liam choked out the word, scraping against his throat like jagged glass. He stared at Sterling and then at me, his eyes bulging with a terror so pure it was almost beautiful to witness. His mind was violently short-circuiting, trying to process the impossible mathematics of the situation. The woman he had spent the last hour degrading, the woman he had called a broke spinster, and a delusional failure, was legally bound to the man who held his entire financial future in the palm of his hand. Chloe looked like she had been shoved out of a moving vehicle, her meticulously planned luxury event planner persona completely disintegrated. She grabbed the back of her dining chair, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. "But Maya is," she gasped, pointing a shaking acrylic nail at me. "But she is. She lives in a tiny apartment. She is cut off. She has absolutely nothing." Sterling finally turned his head, slowly shifting his gaze away from me and directing it toward my sister. The warmth in his eyes vanished in an instant, replaced by the cold, calculating stare of a man who dismantles corporate empires for sport. "She owns a 6-story brownstone in the Gold Coast," he corrected, his voice dangerously smooth. "And as of last quarter, her venture capital firm controls a portfolio worth more than this entire suburban zip code." He looked down at me, a proud smirk playing on his lips. "My wife simply prefers not to flaunt her wealth in front of people who lack the class to handle it." My uncles were rigidly still, their eyes darting between me and the titan standing by my side. My aunts had completely forgotten their holiday gossip, their faces frozen in various masks of profound shock. I had sat at this table for years, absorbing their pity, their condescension, and their thinly veiled insults. I had let them believe whatever narrative my mother spun about my failures because my peace was always worth more than their validation. But tonight the truth was entirely unavoidable. I reached up and placed my hand over Sterling's, feeling the solid, comforting weight of his presence. I looked directly at Liam, who was currently hyperventilating against the edge of the table. He looked absolutely pathetic. The custom suit and the fake Rolex could not hide the fact that he was a small, desperate man who had just insulted the queen of the kingdom he was begging to enter. I tilted my head, offering Liam the same condescending smile he had given me just an hour ago. "You seem unwell, Liam," I said, my voice laced with lethal politeness. "I thought you would be thrilled. Did you not just say that you wanted me to have a chance at a normal life with someone who could provide for me? Well, here he is, the big boss you have been waiting for. So tell me, how is that $10 million capital deployment looking right about now?" Liam opened his mouth, but the only sound that escaped his throat was a pathetic, hollow wheeze. He looked completely unhinged. His eyes darted wildly between my face and Sterling, as if searching for a hidden camera or waiting for someone to yell surprise. The absolute reality of his situation was crashing down on him with the force of a concrete wall. He was a small-time hustler standing in front of the actual architect of the financial empire he had been pretending to conquer. Sterling did not even afford Liam the dignity of maintaining eye contact. He slowly turned his head to look down at me, his expression shifting into a mask of pure clinical detachment. He casually adjusted the cuff of his cashmere sweater before speaking. His voice cut through the stifling silence of the dining room with absolute devastating precision. "Maya, my love," Sterling said, gesturing lazily toward the trembling man gripping the edge of the mahogany table. "Is this the scammer you told me to just leave the file on my desk?" The word scammer dropped into the center of my mother's perfect Christmas dinner like a live explosive. My mother let out a sharp, choking gasp. She grabbed the back of her dining chair, her knuckles turning completely white. "Scammer," she repeated, her voice vibrating with a mixture of horror and denial. "Mr. Sterling, there must be some kind of profound misunderstanding. Liam is an established investor. He comes from a legacy family. He is deploying $10 million into your firm." Sterling ignored my mother entirely. He treated her frantic defense the exact same way he treated Liam, with absolute crushing indifference. He kept his dark, piercing eyes locked exclusively on me, waiting for my answer. "Yes, darling," I said, my voice ringing out clear and steady. "That is exactly the man. I told you his paperwork was a complete joke, but I figured you could use a good laugh before the holidays." Liam's legs finally gave out. He collapsed heavily into his dining chair, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. "Sir, please," he stammered, holding his hands up in a desperate, pleading gesture. My broker assured me the capital structure was entirely sound. I have the financial backing of major syndicates. I have the necessary liquidity. We are prepared to meet your maximum hurdle rate. I can restructure the entire deployment right now if you just give me 5 minutes to explain. Sterling looked at him with an expression of profound pity. You do not have a broker, Liam. Sterling said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register. You have a glorified telemarketer working out of a strip mall in New Jersey, and you certainly do not have $10 million in liquid cash. You do not even have $10,000 in liquid cash. The dining room descended into absolute chaos. My uncles began muttering to each other in shocked, hushed tones. My aunts were gripping their pearl necklaces, staring at Liam as if he had just transformed into a monster right before their eyes. The pristine facade of his old money pedigree was peeling off his skin, revealing the pathetic, desperate fraud hiding underneath. But Chloe could not take it. The absolute destruction of her perfect husband and her flawless luxury life was too much for her fragile ego to process. She completely snapped. She threw herself violently in front of Liam, shielding him with her body as if Sterling were holding a weapon. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure hysterical rage. "Stop lying!" Chloe shrieked, pointing a trembling acrylic fingernail directly at my face. "You are doing this on purpose. You are completely sick, Maya. I do not know how you managed to trick this man into marrying you, but you are obviously feeding him absolute lies about my husband just to ruin our lives." Chloe spun around to face Sterling, her chest heaving as she desperately tried to reconstruct her shattered reality. "Mr. Sterling, you are being manipulated," she cried out, her voice cracking with frantic desperation. "Maya is a bitter, jealous spinster. She has been jealous of me her entire life. Liam is a financial genius. He comes from one of the most respected families on the East Coast. He has trust funds and legacy investments. You are listening to a woman who literally lives in a slum and begs for scraps." I did not raise my voice. I did not interrupt her unhinged tantrum. I simply looked at my sister with a calm, terrifying smile. Sterling did not argue with Chloe. He did not engage with her hysterical screaming or her desperate attempts to defend a man who was currently trying to melt into the upholstery of his dining chair. Sterling simply stood tall, unbothered, and utterly untouchable. He slowly raised his right hand and snapped his fingers once. The sharp, crisp sound echoed loudly over Chloe's frantic sobbing. The heavy brass doors of the foyer swung open again. A tall, sharp-featured man in a perfectly tailored dark suit stepped into the penthouse. He moved with the same quiet, lethal efficiency as Sterling. This was David, his senior executive assistant, and one of the most ruthless fixers in the Chicago financial district. He did not look at my mother or the horrified extended family. He walked in a straight, deliberate line directly toward our end of the dining table. In his right hand, David carried a thick, heavy black leather briefcase. Chloe stopped screaming. Her mouth hung open as she watched the assistant approach. My mother took a trembling step backward, her eyes wide with growing terror. The entire room fell into a suffocating, breathless silence, watching the assistant move. David reached the mahogany table. He did not say a single word. He simply hoisted the heavy leather briefcase and brought it down hard onto the table, right next to my mother's shattered wine glass. The loud, solid thud of the briefcase hitting the wood sent a massive, violent shudder through the room. David stepped back, clasping his hands behind his back, and stood at absolute rigid attention waiting for his next order. Sterling reached forward. His large hands gripped the brass latches of the briefcase. The sharp metallic click of the locks snapping open sounded like the final nail being driven into Liam's coffin. Sterling flipped the heavy brass latches of the briefcase open, but he did not reach inside. He simply took one slow, deliberate step backward, yielding the floor entirely to me. He stood behind my chair like a silent, impenetrable fortress, granting me absolute authority over the room. This was my family. This was my execution to perform, and he was going to let me dismantle them piece by piece. I reached into the plush velvet interior of the briefcase and pulled out a thick-bound stack of financial audits. The paper was heavy, carrying the distinct watermarks of top-tier forensic accountants. The sharp sound of the files hitting the mahogany table made several people in the room jump. Chloe took a cautious step back. Her eyes darted frantically between the documents and my face. She tried to maintain her aggressive posture, but her shoulders were trembling. "What is that?" she demanded, trying to inject her usual venom into her voice, but it wavered pathetically. "Are those fake documents you mocked up in your little apartment to frame us?" I did not look at Liam yet. He was the main course, but I had a starter to completely devour first. I pushed the heavy stack of papers across the table directly in front of my sister. "Let us talk about your luxury event empire, Chloe," I said smoothly, my voice echoing in the dead silent room. "You have been standing in this dining room screaming about your elite status and your massive budgets. You bragged about the winter solstice gala at the Drake Hotel. You told this entire family that the mayor shook your hand and called you a visionary. You love to paint this picture of a wildly successful businesswoman dominating the high society of Chicago." My mother stepped forward again, her maternal instinct to protect her golden child temporarily overriding her sheer terror of Sterling. "Her business is incredibly successful, Maya," she said, her voice tight and defensive. "You have no right to question her. I have seen the photos. I have seen her social media. She is living the exact life I raised her to live. You are just trying to embarrass her because you are jealous." "Social media is a fascinating tool, Mother," I replied, opening the first folder. "It allows someone to project absolute perfection while their actual reality is crumbling into dust. You see, Chloe's events are indeed beautiful. The imported orchids are real. The vintage champagne is top tier. But there is a massive fundamental difference between throwing a luxury party and actually running a profitable business." I pulled out a profit and loss statement highlighting a sea of red numbers and slid it toward them. "Your company has not turned a single cent of profit since its inception 3 years ago, Chloe. In fact, you operate at a catastrophic, staggering loss. The Winter Solstice Gala was not funded by massive budgets from wealthy clients. You heavily subsidized that entire event yourself, just so you could take photos with high society figures and pretend you belonged in their circle. You paid out of pocket for the ice sculptures, the caviar, and the string quartet just to generate fake content for your Instagram page." Chloe's face turned ash white. She scrambled forward and grabbed the document, trying to hide the numbers from the aunts and uncles who were craning their necks to see the damage. "These are absolute lies," she shrieked, clutching the paper to her chest. "This is proprietary corporate information. You hacked me, Maya. I am going to call the police and have you arrested for corporate espionage." When a company defaults on its commercial loans and its debt gets bundled and sold on the open market, that information becomes highly accessible to the firm that buys it, I stated coldly. "My firm bought your debt, Chloe. I own your ledgers now. I own every single desperate financial mistake you have made over the last 36 months. I turned my attention entirely to my mother. She was staring at Chloe with a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. "Mother, you always praised Chloe for her financial independence. You always threw her fake success in my face at every holiday gathering. You sat in the front pew of our church bragging to your friends about your youngest daughter, the CEO. Did you ever stop to wonder how a startup event planner with 0 actual paying clients managed to secure private ballrooms at the Drake Hotel? Did you ever wonder how she afforded those designer dresses she flaunts at Sunday service? She had investors," my mother said defensively, though her voice completely lacked its usual unshakable confidence. "She told me she secured private backing from elite sponsors." I let out a sharp, genuine laugh that cut through the tension. "Private backing. Is that what she called it?" "Mother, the only private backing she secured was your American Express Platinum card and your Discover card, and the 2 secret lines of credit she opened using your social security number and forging your signature." My mother froze completely. Her eyes snapped from me to Chloe. Chloe was actively physically shaking now. She backed away from the table, shaking her head frantically, her perfectly styled hair falling into her face. "Mom, do not listen to her," Chloe pleaded, her voice dropping into a desperate whine. "I can explain everything. It was just a temporary cash flow issue. I was going to pay it all back as soon as the gala generated new corporate leads. It was just business overhead." "I knew about the American Express," my mother stammered desperately, trying to maintain her dignity in front of the extended family. I authorized her to use it for a few minor vendor deposits. It was just seed money to help her scale the business. A good mother helps her children, Maya. That is something you would not understand, because you isolated yourself. A few minor vendor deposits, I repeated. I reached into the briefcase again and pulled out a second folder. This one was incredibly thick, bound with a heavy-duty red clip. I tossed it onto the table right over the spilled red wine, allowing the expensive fabric of the tablecloth to soak up the mess. You authorized her to use your card for $20,000, Mother. That was your agreed-upon limit. Do you have any idea what the current outstanding balance is across all the accounts she secretly controls in your name? Have you checked your personal credit score in the last 6 months? My mother's breathing became dangerously shallow. She clutched the heavy pearl necklace at her throat, her eyes darting frantically to the thick red folder. It cannot be more than 30,000, she whispered, her voice cracking. She promised me she would pay the minimums every month. She promised me her business was generating revenue. Read the number on the front page. Mother, I commanded, my voice echoing with absolute authority. Read the total amount your golden child has stolen from your retirement accounts just to fund her fake luxury lifestyle. My mother reached out with a trembling hand. She pulled the folder toward her and flipped open the heavy cover. Her eyes scanned the first page. For a full 10 seconds, she did not make a single sound. The entire dining room watched as her face lost every ounce of its color. She looked like she had just been physically hollowed out, leaving nothing but a fragile shell of the arrogant matriarch she had been an hour ago. $450,000. My mother gasped, the number tearing out of her throat like a physical injury. Her knees buckled instantly. She had to grab the back of her heavy dining chair to keep from collapsing onto the floor. 450,000. Chloe, what is this? What did you do to me? How could you possibly spend $500,000 on flowers and dresses? Chloe burst into frantic, hysterical sobbing. She reached out for our mother, but my mother violently slapped her hand away, stepping back as if Chloe were covered in a contagious disease. Mom, please, it was an investment. Chloe wailed, her perfect luxury persona completely eradicated, leaving a pathetic, desperate child in its place. I needed to keep up appearances. The elite clients expect a certain lifestyle. If I did not look the part, they would never hire me. I had to buy the clothes and book the flights. Chloe spun around, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. She pointed a frantic, shaking finger directly at her husband. Liam said it was fine, she cried, throwing the man she had just fiercely defended straight into the line of fire. Liam told me to use your credit lines to float the business. He promised me he was going to pay it all off as soon as his massive $10 million deployment closed. He said Vanguard Apex was going to make us so rich that $500,000 would look like pocket change. He told me to keep spending. That was the magic phrase. That was the exact desperate pivot I needed. Chloe, in her absolute panic to save herself from my mother's wrath, had just handed me the perfect transition. My mother, still hyperventilating and clutching her chest, slowly turned her head away from her ruined golden child. She locked her terrified, devastated eyes onto Liam, the man who was supposed to be the savior of our family. The man with the fake old money pedigree and the fake Rolex watch was still paralyzed against the edge of the table. He was sweating profusely, watching the absolute destruction of his wife's fake empire. And now he realized that the crosshairs had just shifted entirely onto him. Liam wiped his forehead with the back of his trembling hand. He tried to speak, but I did not give him the chance to construct another lie. I reached right back into the heavy leather briefcase and pulled out a slim gray folder. It was much thinner than Chloe's massive debt ledger, but the contents inside were infinitely more destructive. Let us talk about your profound generational wealth, Liam, I said, my voice slicing through the heavy silence of the dining room. Let us examine this staggering financial legacy you boast about to anyone who will listen. You claim your family has been summering in Martha's Vineyard for generations. You claim your grandfather sat on the board of elite regional banks. You have spent the last 3 years parading around my mother's house, treating my family like peasants who should be grateful to breathe the same air as an aristocrat. I opened the gray folder and slid a single sheet of paper across the mahogany table. It stopped right next to his fake gold watch. Your real legal last name is not even Sinclair Liam, I stated coldly. It is Higgins. You were born in a working-class suburb of Albany, New York. Your grandfather was not a banking executive. He was a mid-level bookkeeper who filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy in 1998. You legally changed your last name to Sinclair when you moved to Chicago because you wanted to infiltrate high society and you knew that Higgins did not sound wealthy enough for the country club crowds you planned to con. My aunts and uncles murmured in absolute shock. The whispers rippled down the length of the dining table. My mother stared at Liam, her eyes wide with total disbelief. The man she had worshipped, the man she had proudly presented to her entire social circle as the ultimate prize, was nothing but a cheap impostor. But changing your name does not change your absolute lack of financial literacy. I continued, closing the distance between us. You stand in this penthouse bragging about a $10 million capital deployment into Vanguard Apex. You convinced your desperate wife that this magical deployment would instantly wipe out $500,000 of stolen credit card debt. You fed her lies about massive returns and elite partnerships to keep her spending so you could maintain your illusion of wealth. Liam's chest heaved. He gripped the back of his chair, his knuckles stark white. Maya, stop! He choked out, his voice cracking. You are crossing a legal line. You cannot say these things. I am just reading the financial audit, Liam, I replied, raising my voice so every single person in the room could hear me clearly. Because that $10 million you keep bragging about does not belong to you. It never belonged to you. You operate a boutique wealth management firm that is actually just a hollow shell LLC registered to a virtual mailbox. You have been aggressively soliciting investments from local business owners, your fellow country club members, and even the parishioners at my mother's church. My mother let out a strangled cry. My friends, she whispered, her voice trembling with absolute terror. You told me to introduce you to my friends. I ignored her, keeping my eyes locked on Liam. You promised them a guaranteed 12% quarterly return, I said, detailing his crimes with surgical precision. You printed out fake glossy prospectuses featuring stock photos of commercial real estate, but you never actually invested a single dime of their capital into any market. You did not buy real estate, you did not buy bonds, you did not even open a legitimate brokerage account. I slammed my hand down on the table right next to his fake Rolex. The loud crack made him jump backward. You simply used the principal from your newest investors to pay the fictitious returns to your oldest investors. I declared, my words ringing out with brutal clarity. You paid for your tailored suits, your leased luxury cars, and Chloe's massive event deposits using stolen money. You are not a titan of industry, Liam. You are running a classic textbook Ponzi scheme, and it is actively collapsing right out from under you. The dining room erupted into chaos. My uncles stood up from their chairs, pointing at Liam and shouting in outrage. My aunts gasped, clutching each other in pure horror. They had all been forced to listen to this man brag for years, and now they were witnessing his complete unmasking as a criminal. You realized the money was drying up. I continued, raising my voice over the noise of the outraged family. The new investors stopped coming in, and the old investors started asking to liquidate their portfolios. You panicked. You knew the entire house of cards was about to fall, and you would be facing federal wire fraud charges. So you gathered exactly $10 million of stolen capital, the last remaining funds in your fraudulent accounts. You tried to legitimately deploy it into Vanguard Apex, hoping and praying that a massive institutional return would allow you to pay back the principal you stole and keep you out of federal prison. I leaned in close enough to see the sheer animal panic in his eyes. You were betting your entire freedom on my husband's firm accepting your dirty money. But our compliance team flagged your subsidiary holding company in less than 4 hours. They tracked every single fraudulent wire transfer right back to your personal accounts. Vanguard Apex did not fast-track you, Liam. We flagged you for immediate federal review. Something inside Liam completely snapped. The polished, arrogant facade he had maintained for years violently shattered, leaving nothing but a desperate, cornered animal. He shoved his dining chair backward with such force that it crashed to the floor. "You are lying!" he screamed, his face contorted in an ugly mask of rage and terror. He pointed a shaking finger at me, spit flying from his lips. You are a psychotic lying bitch. Everything you just said is a complete fabrication. My firm is entirely legitimate. My returns are documented and audited. You are just jealous of me. You have always been jealous of me and Chloe. He paced frantically behind the table, running his hands over his head, wildly messing up his perfectly styled hair. He looked frantically at my mother, then at his wife, trying to find a single ally in the room. Do not listen to her, he begged, his voice cracking into a hysterical pitch. She is making all of this up because she hates us. She hates that we are successful. She hired someone to fake these documents just to ruin our Christmas. When nobody moved to comfort him, when he saw the absolute disgust on the faces of my aunts and uncles, his desperation morphed into violent aggression. I will sue you for this, he roared, slamming his fist down on the dining table. I will drag you into court and I will destroy your entire life. This is defamation. This is pure malicious slander. I have lawyers, Maya. I have the best corporate defense attorneys in the state of Illinois. I will sue you for every single penny you have. I will sue this so-called billionaire husband of yours. I will take everything from you and leave you begging on the streets. You cannot just walk into this penthouse and throw around accusations of federal crimes without facing catastrophic consequences. He was screaming so loudly his vocal cords were beginning to give out. His chest was heaving, his face slick with sweat. He was throwing empty legal threats into the air, desperately hoping something would stick, hoping he could intimidate me into backing down. He thought if he screamed loud enough, he could drown out the truth. I just stood there watching his pathetic meltdown with absolute icy calm. I did not flinch when he yelled. I did not step back when he slammed his fist on the table. I simply waited for him to run out of breath. Are you quite finished, Liam? I asked, my voice steady and completely devoid of any fear. Because you are threatening to sue me with money you do not have, using lawyers you cannot afford to defend a legacy that does not exist. And honestly, we have not even gotten to the worst part of your financial portfolio yet. Liam froze mid-rant. His chest continued to heave, but his eyes widened with renewed terror. He realized in that agonizing second that I was not done dismantling his life. There was still one final piece to this puzzle, and it was going to destroy the only ally he had left in this room. I turned my attention away from Liam and his pathetic, frantic breathing. I slowly shifted my gaze to the head of the mahogany table, locking eyes with my mother. She was sitting rigidly in her high-backed chair, her hands gripping the armrest so tightly her knuckles were completely white. The arrogant matriarch who had spent the entire evening looking down on me was now staring at me with the wide, terrified eyes of a woman who senses the ground opening up beneath her feet. Mother, I began, my voice dropping to a calm, conversational tone that somehow felt more dangerous than a scream. You have always prided yourself on your absolute financial intelligence. You spent my entire childhood lecturing me about the importance of securing a legacy. You loved this penthouse. You loved the address, the prestige it gave you in our community, and the way your friends at church looked at you with such profound envy. I reached into the leather briefcase one final time. I bypassed the standard gray folders and pulled out a thick, heavy envelope sealed with the distinct embossed logo of her primary banking institution. The heavy thud of the envelope hitting the table made my mother flinch violently. You truly believed Liam was your golden ticket? I continued, taking a slow step toward her end of the table. You looked at a mediocre white man in a cheap suit and instantly decided he was the financial savior of your bloodline. You trusted him so completely that you never even bothered to ask for a single verified bank statement. You were so blinded by your desperation to associate yourself with his fake old money pedigree that you handed him the keys to your entire life without a second thought. My mother's breathing became shallow and rapid. Her eyes were pinned to the heavy envelope on the table. She opened her mouth to speak, but her throat was completely dry. Maya, she managed to whisper, her voice trembling violently. What is in that envelope? What did you do? I did not do anything, Mother, I replied softly. I am simply delivering the receipts for your own decisions. I slid the envelope open and pulled out a stack of legally binding financial contracts. I fanned them out across the table, ensuring the bold red stamps and notarized signatures were perfectly visible to everyone in the room. When Liam realized his Ponzi scheme was actively collapsing, he panicked. I explained, addressing the silent, stunned room, but keeping my eyes fixed on my mother. He needed fresh capital immediately just to pay off the angry early investors who were threatening to go to the authorities. He needed a massive injection of cash just to stay out of federal prison for a few more weeks. But his credit was destroyed, and no legitimate bank would ever lend him a single dime. So he came to the one person he knew he could easily manipulate. He came to you. I picked up the first document and read the header out loud. He fed you a brilliant lie, Mother. He told you that Vanguard Apex requires a massive show of good faith from their new partners. He told you that to secure his imaginary $10 million deployment, he needed to show the principal founders a temporary liquid asset reserve. He called it matching capital. He promised you it was just a temporary bridge loan. He swore that the money would sit safely in an escrow account for a few weeks, and then he would return it to you with a massive interest bonus as a thank you for your unwavering faith in him. My mother's face went completely ashen. Her lips parted in silent horror as she recognized the specific legal documents laid out in front of her. And you believed every single word I said, my voice laced with cold, clinical precision. You were so eager to fund his fake empire that you walked into your bank and signed away everything my father worked his entire life to build. I tapped my fingernail against the top document. 2 weeks ago, you completely liquidated your retirement portfolio. You drained your 401k, you cashed out your mutual funds, and you emptied your high-yield savings accounts. You handed Liam a cashier's check for $1.2 million. My aunts gasped out loud, covering their mouths in pure shock. My uncles stared at my mother as if she had completely lost her mind. To drain a retirement account was financial suicide, but to hand it over to a son-in-law without any legal protections was absolute madness. But even that was not enough to cover the massive hole in Liam's fraudulent ledgers. I continued picking up the second document. So you went back to the bank 3 days later. You signed a commercial leveraging agreement. You took out a maximum capacity reverse mortgage on this exact penthouse. You signed over the deed to the only physical asset you owned. You handed Liam another $2 million in borrowed cash. No, my mother choked out, her voice shattering into a frantic sob. No, he said it was secure. He said it was just sitting in a holding account. He promised me he was not going to touch the principal. He swore on his life that it was just for the Vanguard Apex background check. I looked at her with an expression of profound pity. Mother, Vanguard Apex does not require matching capital from external brokers. We have never requested a bridge loan from an incoming partner in the entire history of our firm. That is not how venture capital works. Liam did not put your money into a holding account. The second your wire transfer cleared, he used every single penny of your life savings and the equity of this penthouse to pay off the furious investors who were threatening to ruin him. I leaned forward, pressing my hands against the table. Your money is gone, Mother. It is completely and utterly gone. Liam spent it to save his own skin, and he left you holding the bag. My mother spun around in her chair, her entire body shaking uncontrollably. She looked at Liam, who was still standing near the wall, practically trying to merge with the wallpaper. Liam! She screamed, the sound tearing out of her throat with agonizing desperation. Liam, tell her she is lying. Tell her the money is safe. You promised me Liam. You sat in my living room and held my hands and promised me my future was secure. Tell them the deployment is real. The entire dining room turned to look at the man who had orchestrated this absolute destruction. Liam did not step forward to defend himself. He did not puff out his chest or yell about defamation. He simply looked down at his expensive Italian leather shoes. He could not make eye contact with the woman he had just completely bankrupted. He shrank into himself, looking small, pathetic, and entirely guilty. The silence that followed was the heaviest sound I had ever heard in my life. It was the sound of an entire reality collapsing. My mother stared at his bowed head, and the absolute crushing weight of the truth finally hit her. She realized she had handed her entire life over to a con artist. She realized she had mortgaged the roof over her head to fund a criminal enterprise. And the most devastating realization of all, she realized she had actively funded this destruction while simultaneously mocking the daughter who actually held the power to save her. Her legs gave out. She slumped heavily back into her chair, her hands flying up to cover her face. A raw, guttural wail ripped from her chest, echoing through the penthouse. It was not the calculated, manipulative crying she used to win arguments. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated devastation. She rocked back and forth in her chair, sobbing violently into her palms. She had nothing left. Chloe's luxury event business was a mountain of credit card debt tied to her name. Her retirement was gone. Her home was mortgaged to the absolute maximum limit. The perfect high society life she had spent decades ruthlessly cultivating had just been burned to the ground by the white son-in-law she had worshipped. My uncle stood in stunned silence, unable to even offer comfort to a woman who had orchestrated her own ruin. Chloe watched her mother break down, her own face twisted in absolute horror as she realized that her endless supply of funding had just been completely wiped out. The Bank of Mom was permanently closed, and they were all going down together. The wailing of my mother filled the penthouse, a sound so deeply rooted in despair that it forced the rest of the extended family into an uncomfortable, paralyzed silence. My aunts and uncles simply stood there, completely unable to process the sheer magnitude of the financial ruin that had just been laid bare on the dining table. But Chloe simply could not accept it. Her entire identity, her superiority complex, her carefully curated social media existence, and her status as the golden child were all entirely dependent on Liam being a titan of industry. If Liam was a criminal, that meant she was a fool. It meant her luxury event business was a joke. It meant she had nothing. The cognitive dissonance was too violent for her fragile ego to handle. She let out a piercing, guttural shriek that cut right through my mother's sobbing. "You are lying!" Chloe screamed, her face contorting into an unrecognizable mask of absolute fury. Her eyes were wild, darting around the room as she frantically tried to reject the reality crashing down around her. "You printed these out in your pathetic little office to frame him. Liam is a genius. He is a legitimate investor. You are just a jealous, bitter bitch trying to destroy my marriage because your own life is a miserable failure." Before anyone could stop her, Chloe lunged forward. She threw her entire body across the mahogany dining table, knocking over crystal water goblets and sending silver cutlery crashing to the hardwood floor. Her perfectly manicured hands clawed desperately at the thick folders containing the financial audits and the reverse mortgage contracts. She grabbed a fistful of the bank statements and tried to rip them in half, her acrylic nails digging into the heavy paper. She was panting heavily, behaving like a wild, cornered animal trying to physically destroy the truth to make it magically disappear. I did not even have time to flinch before Sterling moved. He did not shout. He did not rush. He moved with the terrifying, lethal speed of a man who was entirely used to neutralizing physical threats. In a single fluid motion, Sterling stepped directly in front of me, seamlessly inserting his broad, athletic frame between my body and my hysterical sister. He did not raise his hands to physically restrain her. He did not need to. The sheer, overwhelming magnitude of his physical presence was enough to stop her dead in her tracks. Sterling looked down at Chloe, who was still clutching the crumpled bank statements against her chest. The warmth and affection he reserved exclusively for me were completely gone. His dark eyes were now utterly devoid of emotion, mirroring the freezing temperature of a Chicago winter night. He delivered a single sharp glare that was so piercing, so intensely laced with an unspoken promise of absolute destruction that Chloe physically recoiled. "Put the papers down!" Sterling commanded, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous register that vibrated through the floorboards. His tone was not a request. It was an absolute mandate from a man who commanded empires and destroyed adversaries for a living. "Do not take another step toward my wife." Chloe froze, her breathing ragged and uneven. The hysterical rage that had propelled her across the table evaporated the second she made eye contact with him. She was standing mere inches from a legitimate self-made billionaire, and the reality of his power finally penetrated her delusion. Her hands began to shake violently. The crumpled bank statement slipped from her grasp and fluttered silently down to land in the pool of spilled red wine on the table. She stumbled backward, retreating until she hit the edge of the dining chair, her chest heaving as she began to sob uncontrollably. I stepped out from behind Sterling's protective stance, smoothing the front of my dress with absolute calm. "You can tear up every single piece of paper in this penthouse, Chloe," I said, my voice steady and cold. "It will not change a thing. My firm owns the digital ledgers. The bank holds the original deeds. Destroying the props does not cancel the play. You are entirely bankrupt and your husband is a federal criminal. Chloe sank into her chair, covering her face with her trembling hands. She was completely broken, crying out for the man who had promised her the world, but had instead delivered total financial ruin. Liam, she sobbed loudly, her voice echoing with desperate pleading. Liam, tell them it is a lie. Please tell them you have the money. Tell them we are safe. But Liam did not answer her. While the entire room was focused on Chloe's frantic meltdown and Sterling's imposing intervention, Liam had realized something incredibly crucial. He had watched the documents hit the table. He had seen the irrefutable proof of his massive wire fraud, his stolen capital, and his manipulation of my mother's retirement funds. He knew that Vanguard Apex had already flagged his holding company. He knew that the federal authorities were likely already building a massive indictment against him. He was a coward to his absolute core, and cowards do not stay to comfort their ruined wives. Cowards run. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a subtle shifting movement in the shadows of the dining room. I turned my head slightly, tracking the motion without alerting the rest of the panicked family. Liam was quietly stepping backward, inching his way away from the dining table. He was keeping his head low, avoiding eye contact with the aunts and uncles who were still reeling from the shocking revelations. He was actively abandoning the mother-in-law he had just scammed into poverty. He was entirely abandoning the wife who was currently crying out his name in sheer desperation. He was leaving them all to take the fall while he orchestrated his own escape. I watched him slink toward the grand archway that led to the expansive foyer. His eyes were locked onto the heavy mahogany coat rack standing near the private elevator entrance. Hanging on that rack was his tailored wool overcoat. I knew exactly what kind of man Liam was, and I knew exactly what a cornered con artist kept in the inner breast pocket of his coat when his fraudulent empire started showing cracks. He had prepared for this exact scenario. He had the emergency offshore account information, the burner phones and his international passport, securely tucked away inside that lining. He thought he could just slip out the front door, hail a cab to the international airport, and disappear into the night, leaving my family to deal with the federal investigators and the angry investors he had defrauded. He reached the foyer, his breathing shallow and rapid. He threw a quick, terrified glance over his shoulder to see if anyone had noticed his retreat. Seeing my mother weeping into her hands and Chloe sobbing into the table, he clearly believed he had managed to evade detection. He reached out with a trembling hand and grabbed the collar of his expensive wool overcoat, pulling it frantically off the brass hook. He clutched the coat against his chest, a sickening expression of profound relief washing over his pale, sweaty face. He thought he had outsmarted us. He thought he could steal millions of dollars, destroy my family's entire legacy, insult my husband, and just quietly walk away into the night without facing a single consequence. He turned toward the heavy brass handles of the double doors, his hand reaching out to pull them open and make his grand escape. He was entirely convinced that he had won his freedom. But he had absolutely no idea what was waiting for him on the other side of that door. Liam let his fingers wrap tightly around the cool metal of the heavy brass handles. He leaned his body weight forward, preparing to pull the massive doors inward and sprint toward the private elevator. He was already visualizing the layout of O'Hare International Airport, mapping out the quickest route to his departure gate. Before he could exert a single ounce of force, the double doors were shoved violently inward from the outside. The sheer momentum of the heavy wood swinging toward him sent Liam stumbling awkwardly backward. He scrambled to keep his balance, his expensive leather shoes sliding uselessly against the polished Italian marble of the foyer. He clutched his wool overcoat tightly against his chest, as if it were a bulletproof vest. Two towering figures stepped simultaneously over the threshold. They moved in perfect lethal synchronization, immediately filling the entryway and entirely blocking the only exit from the penthouse. They were Sterling's private security operatives. Dressed in immaculate dark suits, with discreet earpieces trailing down their necks, they stood side by side like twin monoliths carved from solid granite. Their expressions were utterly blank, devoid of any emotion or hesitation. They simply stepped forward, forcing Liam to retreat further back into the glaring light of the foyer. Liam bumped into a decorative console table, knocking over a crystal vase. He spun around, his eyes wide and frantic, darting from the security guards blocking the door to the dining room where the rest of the family was stationed. I took my time stepping out from the dining room archway. I moved with a slow, unhurried grace, letting the sharp, rhythmic click of my heels echo against the marble floor. I maintained absolute eye contact with him, watching the terrifying realization wash over his pale, sweating face. He was trapped. There would be no midnight escape. There would be no tactical retreat to an offshore haven. I stopped a few feet away from him, clasping my hands loosely in front of me. I tilted my head, offering him a bright, completely hollow smile. "Where are you going, Liam?" I asked, my voice echoing with a calm, conversational lightness that contrasted violently with the heavy tension in the room. "We have not even cut the Christmas cake yet. The night is still so young and we have so much left to celebrate." The sound of my voice snapped Chloe out of her hysterical sobbing. She raised her head from the dining table, her mascara smeared down her cheeks in dark, jagged lines. She looked past Sterling and my mother, squinting through her tears to see her husband backed into a corner of the foyer. Her eyes dropped to the heavy wool overcoat clutched desperately to his chest. Chloe might have been deeply delusional, but she was not entirely stupid. She saw the coat. She saw the distance between the dining room and the front door. The devastating truth hit her like a physical blow. Her perfect, loyal husband, the titan of industry who promised to protect her, was actively attempting to abandon her to face the federal authorities and her bankrupt mother entirely alone. "Liam, you coward!" Chloe screamed, her voice cracking into a raw, agonized shriek. "You were leaving me. You were going to run away and leave me here to take the fall for your stolen credit cards." My mother turned around in her chair, her face a mask of pure, unfiltered disgust. She stared at the man she had worshipped, the man she had drained her entire life savings to support. He looked absolutely pathetic, cowering in the foyer, clutching his coat like a frightened child. The illusion of his old money pedigree was so thoroughly eradicated that my mother looked physically nauseated just looking at him. Liam ignored his sobbing wife and his ruined mother-in-law. He turned his frantic gaze back to the two massive security operatives blocking the double doors. He puffed out his chest, attempting to summon whatever scraps of arrogant authority he had left. "Get out of my way," he demanded, pointing a shaking finger at the operatives. "You cannot hold me here against my will. This is a private residence. This is false imprisonment and kidnapping. Move right now, or I will have both of you arrested and thrown in a federal penitentiary." The operatives did not even blink. They did not shift their weight or acknowledge his threats. They simply stared straight ahead, forming an impenetrable human wall. Sterling stepped out from the dining room, standing just behind my right shoulder. He crossed his arms over his chest and offered Liam a cold, condescending smirk. "My security team does not take orders from bankrupt con artists, Liam. They take orders from my wife. And she has not dismissed you yet." Liam spun back to face me, his breathing ragged and shallow. "Maya, you have to let me leave," he pleaded, his voice dropping the aggressive act and shifting into pure, desperate begging. "You proved your point. You humiliated me in front of the family. You won. Just let me walk out that door. I have nothing left here anyway." Vanguard Apex passed on my deployment file. "I get it. The deal is dead. Just let me take my coat and go." I let out a soft, breathless laugh, shaking my head slowly. I took another deliberate step toward him, closing the distance. "You think this is just about a rejected application?" I asked, my tone dropping into a razor-sharp whisper. "You think you just get to submit a fraudulent portfolio filled with stolen funds, get a polite rejection letter, and then walk away to start a new scam in a different country?" I gestured gracefully toward the heavy wool overcoat he was practically strangling against his chest. "I know exactly what is inside that left breast pocket, Liam. I know about the expedited international passport. I know about the two burner phones. And I know about the digital security tokens linking to your offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. You thought you were so incredibly smart, creating a complex web of shell companies to hide the capital you stole from my mother's friends." Liam clutched the coat tighter, his eyes darting frantically toward the elevators. "You cannot touch those accounts." He spat a sudden, desperate defiance flaring in his voice. You might have exposed me to this family, but you cannot access my offshore liquidity. It is legally protected by international banking privacy laws. Even your precious Vanguard Apex cannot touch that money. I still have leverage. That is the most fascinating part of your entire tragic story, Liam, I said, smoothing a non-existent wrinkle from the skirt of my designer dress. You see, when you submitted that $10 million capital deployment file to our firm, you did not just hand over a simple term sheet. You submitted yourself to the Vanguard Apex rigorous vetting protocol. To prove your liquidity, you handed my compliance team the absolute complete blueprints to your entire fraudulent corporate architecture. You gave us the routing numbers, the subsidiary holding company names, and the exact legal structures of your debt management firm. The color completely vanished from Liam's face. His jaw hung open as my words slowly penetrated his panicked mind. You handed us the keys to your kingdom. I continued, my voice rising with absolute triumphant authority. And Vanguard Apex does not just reject fraudulent files, Liam. We neutralize threats to the financial sector. I paused, letting the silence stretch for 3 agonizing seconds, ensuring he felt the full weight of his impending doom. We did not just decline your $10 million deployment. I stated, my words striking him like physical blows. Last Tuesday at precisely 9 in the morning, while you were busy bragging to my mother about your elite connections, Vanguard Apex executed a hostile takeover. We did not just reject your file. We acquired your entire primary debt management company. Liam staggered backward, his shoulders hitting the wall of the foyer. A strangled, gasping noise escaped his throat. We bought your corporate debt for pennies on the dollar, I explained, dissecting his destruction with surgical precision. We acquired the parent company that holds every single one of your leveraged assets and liabilities. Every promissory note you forged, every shell company you registered, every stolen dollar you funneled through that holding firm is now legally owned and controlled by Vanguard Apex. Liam slid slowly down the wall, his expensive trousers crumpling around his knees. He hit the marble floor, dropping his wool overcoat. He stared up at me with an expression of total, absolute defeat. You do not have any offshore accounts left, Liam, I whispered, standing over his pathetic, trembling form. As the new legal owners of your holding company, my firm exercised our right to freeze and repatriate all subsidiary assets immediately. Your Cayman Island accounts were liquidated and frozen 48 hours ago. Your passport is useless because your funds are gone. You cannot run, you cannot hide. You are entirely, completely, and utterly owned by me. I turned away from the pathetic heap of a man crying on the marble floor. Liam was no longer my concern. My focus shifted back to the head of the dining table where the true architect of my lifelong misery sat. My mother was completely frozen in her high-backed chair. Her hands trembled uncontrollably in her lap. The arrogant matriarch who had ruled our family with an iron fist was completely shattered. I walked back to the table, my heels clicking sharply against the wood. I reached into the leather briefcase one last time. I pulled out a single heavy manila folder. It was sealed with a thick red stamp from the county clerk's office. I held it up so the light from the crystal chandelier caught the official seal. Mother, I began, my voice dropping to a low, terrifying calm. You have spent the last 8 years telling everyone who would listen that I was a massive disappointment. You told your church group I was a failure. You stood in this very room tonight and demanded that I apologize to a con artist because you believed my life was a pathetic joke compared to his. I threw the red-stamped folder onto the table. It landed with a sharp smack right next to her trembling hands. When Liam took your $2 million, he legally tied the collateral of his holding company to the reverse mortgage you so foolishly signed. I took a slow, deliberate step toward her. And because Vanguard Apex just aggressively acquired his entire corporate structure, we also acquired all of the attached liabilities and physical assets. I leaned across the table, locking my eyes onto hers. I bought your bad debt, Mother. I bought the mortgage. As of yesterday morning, the deed to this property was legally transferred to my portfolio. From this exact second onward, this magnificent penthouse belongs entirely to your failed daughter. My mother let out a sound that I had never heard a human being make before. It was a strangled, breathless gasp of pure, visceral horror. She tried to stand up, but her legs completely gave out beneath her. She slid off the heavy dining chair and collapsed onto the hardwood floor, right into the puddle of spilled red wine. The expensive silk of her designer dress soaked up the dark liquid like blood, but she did not even notice. Chloe scrambled out of her chair. She completely ignored Liam, who was still weeping in the foyer. She rushed to our mother's side, dropping to her knees on the floor. Both of them were looking up at me from the ground. The visual poetry of the golden child and the tyrannical matriarch kneeling at the feet of the family scapegoat was absolutely staggering. "Maya, please," my mother begged, her voice cracking into a frantic, high-pitched whine. She reached out with shaking hands, trying to grab the hem of my dress. I stepped back quickly, refusing to let her touch me. "You cannot do this to me, Maya. This is my home. This is the house I worked my entire life to keep. You cannot throw your own mother out onto the street. You threw me out onto the street when I was 22. I reminded her, my tone completely devoid of any sympathy. "You cut off my bank accounts, changed the locks, and told me I was a disgrace. You let me sleep in a rat-infested studio apartment while you bought Chloe a brand new car just to punish me for not obeying your commands. That was different." My mother sobbed, tears streaming down her face and ruining her expensive makeup. "I was trying to teach you a lesson. I was trying to make you strong. We are family, Maya. We are your blood. You cannot do this to your own blood." Chloe grabbed my mother's arm, nodding frantically. Her face was a mess of smeared mascara and pure panic. "She is right, Maya," Chloe pleaded, her voice shaking with desperate urgency. "We are your family. We are sisters. I am so sorry for what I said earlier. I did not mean any of it. Liam lied to me. He manipulated me, just like he manipulated Mom. I am a victim here too, Maya. You have to help me. You have to let me stay here. We share the same blood." I looked down at the two women kneeling on the floor. I felt absolutely nothing for them. No pity, no guilt, no obligation. The years of emotional abuse, the endless comparisons, the relentless attempts to break my spirit had completely severed any bond we once shared. "Blood." I repeated the word, tasting sour on my tongue. "You want to talk about blood now? Where was this profound family loyalty when you were bragging about my imaginary failures to your friends? Where was this sisterly bond when you were maxing out credit cards and mocking my career? You only care about blood when your own survival is on the line. You do not love me. You never loved me. You only love the version of me you could control and humiliate." My mother pressed her hands together in a desperate, pleading gesture. "I will change, Maya. I swear to God I will change. I will tell everyone the truth. I will tell the whole family how successful you are. I will host a dinner just for you. Please just let me keep the penthouse. I will do whatever you want." I let out a soft, cold laugh. "You still do not understand, Mother. I do not want your dinners. I do not want your fake praise. And I certainly do not want anything to do with you or Chloe ever again. You made your investments. You chose your favorite child, and you chose your perfect son-in-law. Now you get to live with the returns on those investments." My aunts and uncles stood in absolute silence, watching the matriarch of the family beg for mercy. None of them stepped forward to defend her. They had all watched her praise Liam and degrade me for years. They knew exactly how much she deserved this total destruction. They were witnessing the brutal, unforgiving reality of karma. "Please, Maya," Chloe wailed, grabbing the leg of the dining table. "I have nowhere to go. The creditors are going to come after me for the event business. Liam ruined my credit. I will be homeless. You have billions of dollars. You can fix this with a single check. Please just pay off my debt. You are my big sister. You are supposed to protect me." I looked at Chloe with profound disgust. "You are 28 years old, Chloe. It is time you learned how to survive in the real world without stealing from other people. You can start by getting a real job that does not require faking a luxury lifestyle on social media." I turned my attention back to my mother, who was still sobbing into her hands on the floor. You have exactly 30 days to pack up your belongings and vacate my property, Mother. My legal team will be sending the formal eviction notices tomorrow morning. I suggest you start looking for a very small apartment. And you might want to ask your golden child here to help you pack, since you sacrificed your entire retirement fund to pay for her fake orchids. My mother let out another agonizing wail, burying her face against the leg of the dining chair. The sound was a symphony of absolute defeat. She had lost her wealth, her status, her home, and her dignity all in the span of 1 hour. She was completely broken. I took a deep breath, feeling a massive suffocating weight finally lift off my chest. The heavy chains of family expectation and emotional abuse had just been violently shattered. I was entirely free. I turned away from the pathetic scene on the floor and walked back toward the foyer. Sterling was waiting for me, his presence a solid, comforting anchor in the room. He reached out and wrapped his arms securely around my waist, pulling me close against his side. The two security operatives stood rigidly by the double doors, still blocking Liam, who was currently curled into a trembling ball against the wall. "We are leaving," I said to Sterling, my voice clear and ringing with absolute finality. "I am completely finished here." Before Sterling could turn to guide me through the foyer, a sharp, piercing wail cut through the heavy silence of the penthouse. It started as a distant echo from the Chicago streets below, but rapidly amplified, multiplying into a deafening chorus. The distinct, aggressive blare of multiple police sirens ripped through the cold night air. Flashing red and blue lights began to bounce off the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting the opulent dining room in the frantic, chaotic colors of an absolute emergency. The uncles, who had been standing in paralyzed silence, rushed to the expansive glass windows. They peered down at the street level and let out a collective gasp. There were no less than 6 unmarked black SUVs and 3 standard police cruisers aggressively blocking the main entrance of the luxury building. Heavily armed federal agents were already swarming the lobby doors. Liam let out a sound that was barely human. It was a high-pitched, scraping whimper of pure, cornered terror. He scrambled backward on the marble floor, his expensive Italian shoes slipping wildly as he tried to put as much distance as possible between himself and the impending reality. He looked wildly at the private elevator doors, but Sterling's security operatives remained planted exactly where they were, entirely immovable. "You called them?" Liam gasped, pointing a violently shaking finger at Sterling. "You called the police. You cannot do this. I will give the money back. I will sign over whatever you want. Please, you cannot let them take me." Sterling did not even afford him the dignity of a direct response. He casually adjusted his cuffs and kept his gaze fixed straight ahead. "My firm has a very strict compliance protocol, Liam. When we uncover a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme woven into a hostile takeover target, we do not just fire the executives. We fulfill our legal obligation to the Securities and Exchange Commission. The FBI has been building an indictment against your shell companies for months." My compliance team simply handed them the final piece of the puzzle on a silver platter. The sharp chime of the private elevator echoed through the foyer. The indicator light above the heavy brass doors illuminated, signaling that someone was coming up. Chloe scrambled up from the floor where she had been weeping beside our mother. She lunged toward Liam, wrapping her arms around his neck in a desperate, protective embrace. "No," she screamed, her voice tearing through the room. "You cannot take my husband. He is a legitimate investor. He is innocent. My mother paid for those investments. She gave him that money willingly." My mother still collapsed on the floor, let out a fresh wail of pure agony, hearing her golden child openly attempt to throw her under the bus to save a criminal. The absolute betrayal from her favorite daughter was the final crushing blow. She curled into a tight ball on the ruined Persian rug, completely catatonic, unable to even watch the destruction of her carefully curated life. The heavy brass doors of the private elevator slid open with a soft mechanical hiss. A team of federal agents stepped into the penthouse. They wore dark windbreakers with prominent FBI lettering across the back. They moved with absolute tactical precision, fanning out across the foyer and immediately locking their eyes on their target. The lead agent, a tall, imposing woman with a deeply serious expression, stepped forward. She held up a federal warrant, flashing a gold badge that caught the light of the crystal chandelier. Liam Higgins, she announced, her voice echoing with the undeniable weight of federal authority. You are under arrest for multiple counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, and the operation of a fraudulent investment scheme. Put your hands behind your back. Liam did not move. He was completely paralyzed, clutching Chloe as if she could somehow shield him from federal prison. I do not understand, he babbled, tears streaming down his face, ruining his fake tan. There is a mistake. My name is Sinclair. I am an accredited investor. You have the wrong man. The lead agent did not entertain his pathetic delusions. She gestured to the two agents flanking her. They stepped forward, grabbing Liam by the shoulders and ripping him away from his hysterical wife. Liam let out a loud, pathetic shriek as they spun him around and slammed him face first against the custom wallpaper of the foyer. The sharp metallic click of the steel handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed through the entire penthouse. It was the loudest, most satisfying sound I had ever heard. No, Chloe wailed, throwing herself at the federal agents. She clawed at their windbreakers, her perfect manicure snapping against the thick fabric. You cannot take him. He is a legacy. He comes from old money. We have a gala to plan. You are ruining my life. One of the agents easily sidestepped her frantic grabbing, catching her by the arm and firmly pushing her back. Ma'am, step back right now or you will be charged with interfering with a federal investigation. Chloe stumbled backward, her designer dress tearing at the seam. She fell to her knees, her hair a tangled mess, her face swollen and red. She watched in absolute helpless agony as the agents read Liam his Miranda rights. Liam was openly sobbing now, his head hanging low as they marched him toward the elevator. He did not look at my mother. He did not look at his wife. He only looked at the floor, completely broken and entirely humiliated. The extended family watched the procession in dead silence. The aunts who had spent the evening gossiping about my failures were now staring at the floor, absolutely terrified that they might somehow be implicated by association. The uncles who had toasted to Liam's success were actively backing away into the shadows of the dining room. The fake elite kingdom my mother had spent decades building had been completely eradicated in a matter of minutes. The lead agent gave Sterling a brief, respectful nod of acknowledgement before stepping into the elevator behind her team. The brass doors slid shut, sealing Liam's fate and permanently removing him from our lives. The penthouse was eerily quiet now, save for the ragged, gasping sobs of my mother and sister. They were both on the floor, surrounded by the wreckage of the dining room. The spilled wine, the shattered crystal, and the heavily stamped financial documents that proved their absolute ruin. They had literally nothing left. I did not offer them a single word of comfort. I did not offer them a goodbye. They had made their choices, and now they had to live in the rubble. I turned to Sterling. He extended his arm and I looped mine through his, feeling the solid, reassuring warmth of his presence. We turned our backs on the crying women and walked toward the exit, the two security operatives falling into step behind us. As we reached the threshold of the penthouse, I paused. The camera angle slowly shifted, executing a perfect smooth dolly movement, backward, sliding out into the hallway and capturing the full devastating scene behind me. My mother was clutching a torn bank statement. Chloe was staring blankly at the empty spot where her husband had just been arrested. The extravagant Christmas tree sparkled uselessly in the background, a hollow monument to a family that no longer existed. I did not look back at them. I kept my posture completely straight, my chin held high. I looked directly into the lens of the camera, breaking the fourth wall with absolute chilling confidence. A slow, sharp smirk spread across my lips. Blood makes you related, loyalty makes you family, and bad investments, well, that just makes you broke.